Joining us right now is a familiar face to Squawk viewers who's now in a new role at Disney. We want to welcome Hugh Johnston, Disney's CFO. Hugh, it's great to see you this morning.
Great to be with you, Andrew.
I imagine you're on the West Coast, so this is an early morning for you. Curious, let's start actually at the Nelson Peltz of it all, which is this idea that he believes there was a moment yet a year ago where the stock popped on the back of some good news, but it fell back down again. And clearly Nelson, I think, is looking at that and saying, is that happening again?
Yeah, it's interesting, Andrew. I saw the quote yesterday from Tran, and in all candor, I don't know what to do with that. I mean, that just feels like a bit of an idle complaint in so many ways. Hey, let's take a step back and talk about what we really communicated yesterday. Number one, all of the hard work over the last year that Bob and the team have been doing has generated great results. Top-line results are solid. Bottom-line results are really strong. Product of all of the businesses doing really well. So that was sort of point number one. Point number two was we feel confident about the future, which is why we gave the guide that we did. And not just the future for this year, but the future for multiple years with the share repurchase and with the dividend increase. And point number three is we're making progress on the important strategic initiatives to investors. DTC is improving profitability dramatically. ESPN is making good progress in terms of making itself available everywhere. And in addition to that, we feel good about the theatrical with Moana, as well as the exciting news on Taylor Swift. So I think across the board, we're making good progress, and investors should want us to continue to do that and not be disrupted by sort of debates about side issues.
How challenging should we all think the media business is? And when investors say to themselves, not just about Disney, but maybe more broadly, should we be invested in the media industry, an industry that, at least over the past year, 2 years, maybe even longer now, has underperformed the rest of the market?
Yeah, it's interesting. And obviously, I've come to a decision on that personally, which is why I'm here. I came because I thought there was big disruption happening in the industry, but I thought we were actually at an inflection point where the industry, and in particular, the Disney company, was coming out of that inflection point in a really, really positive way. So from an investor perspective, I think this is a good time to catch us. The market is obviously responding positively to the moves that we're making, both in absolute and relative to some of the other companies that we compete with. So I actually feel like this is long-term a great industry. People want to be entertained. People want to get news. People want to get sports. And when demand is there, generally speaking, we'll figure out ways to make money around it.
Tom Rogers was on a little bit earlier and made 2 points that I wanted to play back to you if I could. One was that he was concerned, and I think maybe some analysts have even looked at this, some of the advertising issues on Hulu and how we're supposed to think about that. But maybe the broader point that he was trying to make is he was looking at an analyst report that suggested if you looked at where Netflix was at the same point that Disney's at in terms of revenue, the profitability was higher. What do you think of that part of the analysis?
Well, in terms of where we are on DTC profitability, I think we're very focused on building a really strong, solid business that's very competitive in what's a competitive space. And we feel good about the assets we have, whether it's Disney for the family, whether it's general entertainment with Hulu, or whether it's ESPN for the sports fan. We feel like we offer the household the broadest array of entertainment options with our streaming service. Comparing to where Hulu was 10 years ago is interesting in some ways, but it was such a different time. There was very little competition at that time. Now there's multiple streamers. I feel like we're in a position right now where we've said we're building towards a business that will consistently grow subs and will be a double-digit margin business. And that's an attractive business to be in. So I do feel like we're tracking on the right way, and I feel like we're actually building what will be a terrific business over time.
On the new sports package, should we think of it as a skinny bundle that really is focused around sports, or should we think about it as something broader?
I think we should think about it as both in all candor. It is a skinny bundle to be sure, but I do think it's broader than that. And I heard you all talking a little bit about some of the challenges in bringing sports to fans. You know, when we did this, we started from the perspective of the fan. How do we reduce friction? How do we make it easier for the fan? And I think this product will actually do that very well. it's going to offer, whether it's college football, the NBA, the NHL, it'll offer over 80% of the national games that are currently broadcast in one easy move. To me, that reduces friction for the sports fan. And I know there are still challenges in terms of getting that last 20%, but let's not let perfect be the enemy of what should be a really good product out there.
What about the leagues, however? There are reports now that the NFL, the NBA say that they were caught off guard, uncomfortable about this because they worry that it very well may be, even though everybody's ostensibly acting independently, maybe everybody's not acting independently in terms of as bidding is done for licenses in the future.
Yeah, I can assure you, everyone's going to be acting independently. This is not a JV from a buyer perspective. This is a JV from a distribution perspective. So from that standpoint, the NBA actually came out with a statement yesterday saying they were supportive of it. In addition to that, if I'm sitting in the league offices, the number one thing I'm concerned about is how do I make things easier for my fans so that those fans can get access to my content as easily as possible. And I think this is an enhancement to them. So my expectation is the league should be actually quite happy about this.
Hey, Hugh, that brings the question, though. Is this different than Hulu was? Because if everybody's still kind of got their own agenda, it's tough to pull that together. And that's what we saw with Hulu.
Yeah, I think you have to separate the two, though, Becky. I know there's been some talk about that, but Hulu actually procured content as a collective. We're not procuring content as a collective. We're basically offering a distribution option. So the governance obviously will be everyone sort of voting equally. But in terms of the way that content is procured, in terms of the way the economics work, it's really much more based on individuals contributing themselves into this distribution capability.
When you think about the investment in Epic Games, owner, of course, of Fortnite, speak to what you think the economics of that could turn out to be.
Yeah, I think it's early days for us to speculate on that. I mean, the product isn't even built yet, so I think we have a little bit of time. What I do know is if you look at basically people under 40, they do spend a lot of time gaming. And for Disney, this is the biggest move we've ever made into gaming. And we're doing it with Fortnite, which is obviously a great franchise. It will be a Disney universe that will sit side by side with a Fortnite universe with the ability to move back and forth between the two universes. So I think it's going to be very, very attractive. In terms of pricing and all of those things, it's just too early for us to really talk about. But I do expect it's going to be a very profitable business for us. That's part of why we took the small equity stake, because we thought to ourselves, why not get compensated from an equity perspective, not just from a games perspective.